The world has grown used to the imagery of war tanks rolling across borders, missiles lighting up the night sky, fighter jets screaming overhead. But there's another kind of war. A war fought silently, without front lines. A war in the shadows. For more than 2 decades, Israel and Iran have waged such a shadow war, not with formal declarations, but with spies, malware, explosions, and mysterious deaths that no one officially takes responsibility for. At the heart of this clandestine conflict is the Mossad, Israel's legendary intelligence agency. In this video, we'll trace Mossad's long and often hidden campaign, from the assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists to back-channel diplomacy with Arab states. All to answer one pressing question: how can a secret war reshape the real world? The hostility between Israel and Iran didn't begin with bombs. It began with a political earthquake. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Tehran overthrew the pro-Western monarchy. Iran, once a quiet ally of Israel under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, suddenly became its loudest and most determined enemy. Iran's new supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, called Israel a cancerous tumor that must be removed. Diplomatic ties were severed. Tehran began openly supporting anti-Israel groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. And it pursued nuclear capabilities perhaps as a shield, or perhaps as a sword in its confrontation with Tel Aviv. Israel, for its part, acted early and decisively. It established what would become known as the Begin Doctrine, named after Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who in 1981 ordered the bombing of Iraq's Asarak nuclear reactor. The doctrine's core message was simple: no hostile state in the Middle East must be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons by any means necessary, including preemptive strikes. And so began a dangerous game. Iran accelerated its nuclear ambitions. Israel, through the Mossad, launched a relentless campaign of disruption. No declarations. No open battles. But the cost was paid in blood, secrets, and the slow erosion of international norms. While the world debated whether Iran had the right to enrich uranium, the question in Tel Aviv wasn't should we stop them, but how. And no one answered that question more forcefully than Meir Dagan, Mossad's director from 2002 to 2011. Under Dagan, the Mossad transformed from a classic intelligence service into a proactive, sharp-edged strike force. He had no faith in diplomacy or empty deterrence. In his view, if Iran was inching toward the bomb, the only viable options were to delay, sabotage, or eliminate. He launched a series of bold operations that Israel never officially acknowledged. One of the most chilling, the targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists, those believed to be at the heart of the weapons program. Some died in car bombings. Others were shot in broad daylight on the streets of Tehran. A few perished in what looked like freak accidents. No clear fingerprints were left, but the world knew who was behind it. There was another front, far less visible but equally lethal: cyber warfare. In partnership with the United States, Israel developed a now infamous piece of malware called Stuxnet, which infiltrated Iran's nuclear facilities. At Natanz, thousands of uranium-enriching centrifuges spun out of control or silently broke down. It was the first known cyber attack in history to cause real-world physical damage, and it set a dangerous precedent for the future of digital warfare. But Mossad didn't stop with people or machines. They went after the entire supply chain. They inserted faulty parts into shipments, bribed engineers, and even used front companies to sell Iran-compromised equipment, some designed to malfunction or explode weeks or months after installation. Meir Dagan called it divine intervention, a phrase that carried both religious weight and strategic intent. He firmly believed that without these actions, Iran would have built a bomb long ago. In his eyes, hesitation was just another form of defeat. And while there was never concrete public evidence, many international experts agree, these assassinations, sabotage operations, and cyber attacks delayed Iran's nuclear program by 5 to 10 years. But they also escalated the conflict. The quiet war had become real, just still hidden in the shadows. Then came one of Mossad's boldest operations in its entire history. Not a cyber attack. Not an assassination. But a theft. A theft so brazen, it stunned the intelligence world. It happened in the early hours of January 31, 2018, in the heart of Tehran. The target? A dusty, unassuming warehouse in the Shurabad district. No signs, no guards, no reason to suspect it contained anything of value. But behind its plain exterior, inside steel vaults thick as bank safes, lay Iran's nuclear secrets, over 100,000 documents, CDs and hard drives, blueprints, test results, internal memos, all chronicling decades of work on building a bomb. The Mossad had planned the mission for months. They built a full-scale replica of the warehouse abroad to rehearse every move. Agents tracked guard schedules, mapped the vault layout, timed every step. When the moment came, a Mossad team entered the facility, cracked the safes, and extracted more than half a ton of classified materials, all in under 6 hours. And then, just as silently, they disappeared. Not a single shot was fired. What they retrieved was explosive, not just literally, but politically. The documents confirmed what Israel had long claimed, that Iran had secretly pursued a nuclear weapons program, complete with designs for warheads that could fit on ballistic missiles. But here's what made it even more remarkable: Mossad didn't keep it secret. They wanted the world to see. Just a few months later, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a televised press conference. He stood before a screen, held up a CD, and announced to the world, Iran lied. He displayed diagrams, file folders, even photographs presenting the heist's haul as undeniable proof that Iran had deceived the international community. It was part theater, part strategy, and entirely deliberate. Netanyahu wasn't just speaking to global audiences. He was speaking directly to Washington. For Israel, the Tehran heist was more than just an intelligence triumph, it was a direct strike at Iran's international credibility. For Mossad, it was proof that they could operate deep inside enemy territory, outsmart defenses, and walk away with the crown jewels. And for Iran, it was a shock not just to national security, but to national confidence. If even their most secret nuclear archive wasn't safe, what was? The operation didn't just embarrass Iran's leadership. It triggered a chain reaction in global diplomacy, one whose consequences would play out in the months and years to follow. Just a few months after the heist, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared on global television. Standing in front of a black backdrop emblazoned with the words "Iran lied," he held up CDs and printed documents, materials stolen from Tehran's secret warehouse. In a presentation that lasted nearly 20 minutes, Netanyahu showed blueprints of warheads, internal letters between Iranian scientists, and evidence of a covert weapons program masquerading as civilian research. It looked like a courtroom exhibit, but it was, in fact, a diplomatic ambush. Because the real target of this carefully staged reveal wasn't the global public, it was the White House. At the time, President Donald Trump was already skeptical of the Iran nuclear deal known as the JCPOA, but hadn't made a final decision. By publicizing the stolen archive, Israel aimed to tip the scales, to show that Iran was fundamentally untrustworthy, and that the deal was little more than a flimsy mask hiding dangerous ambitions. It worked. Just weeks after Netanyahu's televised address, President Trump announced the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA, defying pushback from European allies. Old sanctions were reinstated. New sanctions followed. And Iran, frustrated, cornered, and furious, began walking back its own commitments under the deal. In a matter of months, the entire framework of the JCPOA collapsed like a building with no foundation. The irony? Most of the stolen documents focused on Iran's nuclear activity before 2003. They revealed past deception, not current violations. But in intelligence and politics, historical truth isn't just something to record, it's something to weaponize. For Iran, the collapse of the deal marked a turning point. The regime accelerated uranium enrichment. The Natanz and Fordow facilities roared back to life. Enrichment levels reached 60%, dangerously close to weapons grade. And with each step, Tehran sent a message: if you push us into a corner, don't expect us to sit still. For Israel, however, the collapse posed a different kind of problem. Without a deal in place, how do you stop Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold? And would covert strikes, sabotage, and assassinations still be enough? Amid this escalating tension, one name began to dominate headlines and diplomatic backchannels alike: Yossi Cohen. Unlike his predecessors who operated from the shadows, Cohen emerged into the spotlight with the poise of a seasoned diplomat, even a statesman. Thank you for using Panopreter Basic. With slicked back hair, tailored suits, and a calm baritone voice, Cohen wasn't just a veteran spy. He was a master negotiator. The kind of man who could earn the trust of both a Saudi crown prince and a U.S. national security advisor, sometimes over a single dinner. Raised in an observant Jewish family, fluent in English, and fiercely loyal to Israel, Cohen blended religious conviction with diplomatic finesse. But his most remarkable achievement was redefining what Mossad could be. Under his leadership, Mossad wasn't just gathering intelligence or blowing up centrifuges, it was brokering relationships. Cohen orchestrated dozens of secret meetings with leaders from the Gulf countries that, for decades, had no official ties with Israel. The UAE, Bahrain, Oman, even Saudi Arabia. At first, these contacts were invisible. Then, they began to emerge into the light. Cohen laid the groundwork for what would later become the Abraham Accords, a groundbreaking agreement that normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states. An achievement that once seemed impossible. And it all started in rooms with no flags, no photographers, and no names on the meeting schedule. To Cohen, isolating Iran wasn't just a matter of national security, it was long-term geopolitical strategy. The more allies Israel could build in the region, the more Iran would be surrounded. And when Gulf leaders began to believe that Israel could help protect them from Tehran's influence, they were willing to shake hands even with a former enemy. Cohen understood what others often missed: a bomb might kill a scientist, but a handshake could change the entire balance of power. In this delicate fusion of darkness and diplomacy, Mossad under Yossi Cohen wrote a new chapter in the history of modern intelligence. But if one moment defined the final phase of this shadow war, it was the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. His name wasn't well known to the public, but in intelligence circles, he was legendary. Fakhrizadeh was considered the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program. His name appeared repeatedly in the Tehran archives stolen by Mossad. He was central to the effort. Some even called him Iran's Oppenheimer. On November 27, 2020, Fakhrizadeh was killed while traveling with a convoy outside Tehran. According to various reports, he was targeted by a remote-controlled machine gun mounted on a pickup truck, guided by facial recognition and satellite link. No assassins were on site. The weapon self-destructed after the job was done. If the reports are accurate, it was more than an assassination, it was a showcase of next-generation targeted killing. Fakhrizadeh's assassination sent shockwaves through Iran. It wasn't just the loss of a top nuclear scientist, it was a chilling message: no one connected to Iran's weapons program, no matter how well protected, was truly safe. And perhaps even more pointedly, it signaled a shift in strategy. If Iran's nuclear progress couldn't be stopped through technology, then the minds behind it would be eliminated. In response, Iran vowed retaliation. Thank you for using Panopreter Basic. But once again, it found itself on the defensive. Meanwhile, Israel kept up its shadow campaign, sabotaging enrichment facilities, causing mysterious explosions in warehouses, releasing toxic gas in laboratories. These operations went unclaimed, but the pattern was unmistakable. Still, with each new strike, a difficult question began to emerge: were these tactical victories actually slowing Iran down? Or were they only hardening Tehran's resolve to push forward faster? The shadow war, it seemed, was reaching its limits. And when tools of secrecy and sabotage no longer serve as deterrents, the line between covert conflict and open war starts to blur. Iran, no longer restrained, began backing away from the commitments it had once made under the JCPOA deal, already hanging by a thread after the U.S. withdrawal. In official reports to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran revealed that it had raised its uranium enrichment from 3.67%, the JCPOA limit, to 20%, then 60%, and eventually close to 90% weapons grade. Even more alarming, Iran began operating new generations of centrifuges faster, more efficient deep underground in fortified facilities like Fordow, nearly impervious to conventional airstrikes. Technically speaking, this meant that if Iran decided to cross the line, it could build a nuclear weapon in just a matter of weeks. And this time, very few believed they were enriching uranium for peaceful purposes. Israel responded in familiar ways: more sabotage, more pressure, more assassinations, but with diminishing returns. Iran had learned. It dispersed its facilities. It dug deeper underground. It rotated personnel to reduce vulnerability. Within Israel's leadership, doubts began to surface. Could their arsenal of covert tactics and targeted strikes still work? Or was it no longer enough? And if all else failed, would Israel be forced to act openly? As global powers called for restraint, both Israel and Iran understood something with growing clarity: the distance between shadow war and outright conflict had shrunk to a thread. A thread now pulled taut not just by weapons, but by a collapse of trust. Mossad had demonstrated extraordinary capabilities tracking, striking, and manipulating the global narrative. They won battle after battle in the shadows. But had they won the war? Iran, despite the losses, had not stopped. If anything, it had adapted. And in doing so, it showed something unsettling: when a nation is surrounded, sanctioned, and attacked in the dark, its last form of defense may well be the very thing its enemies fear most: a nuclear weapon. That is the dangerous paradox at the heart of this story. The harder one side tries to prevent the other from acquiring the bomb, the more it may actually push them toward it. At this point, the question is no longer who's right or who's wrong. The question is, how much time do we have before a shadow war becomes a real one? And can the world break out of the cycle it helped create? The most terrifying thing isn't what we've seen. It's what we haven't yet uncovered. And if history whispers a warning, it might be this: real wars sometimes begin with a click of a mouse, and a stolen file in the dark. Today, the tension between Israel and Iran no longer lives entirely in the gray zone. Recent developments still ongoing and unresolved remind us that when a shadow war drags on too long, the boundary between secrecy and reality can vanish without warning.